Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM's POTUS.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM for Tuesday, January 21st. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. Well, today is the first full day of the second Trump administration. A lot going on, but let's start with these pardons. Tom, Trump pardoned or gave clemency to nearly every single convicted person from the January 6th event on Capitol Hill. He dismissed any pending cases, saying his action, quote, ends a grave national injustice that has been perpetrated upon the American people. A lot of Democrats and even some Republicans disagree. What do you make of it? And what do you make of these blanket pardons?
Well, he said he was going to do this. He signaled it very, very clearly for a long time, during the election, leading up to his election. And so it's not a surprise. I think this issue is one where how you view it depends on where you sit. Obviously, Democrats think this is a travesty and a miscarriage of justice and an abuse of the pardon power. And folks on the right who have followed this story and who think that the prosecutions in and of themselves were the miscarriage of justice, are happy about this and think that most of these folks should be pardoned. And so, I don't know enough about the details of each case. I think Trump might have been able to be a little bit more selective, maybe. Some of the worst offenders he might not have wanted to pardon. But look, he did what he did. He said he was going to do it. And, the Biden pardons, the way Biden has handled his pardons, including all of his family members just minutes before he left office, really give Democrats no leg to stand on, no moral high ground, no ability to judge this in any way if they're not willing to speak out against their own president, which very few have been willing to do.
Well, Carl, Vice President Vance said I think a few days ago, if you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. Speaker Mike Johnson said recently a Sunday that peaceful protesters should be pardoned, but violent criminals should not. So there seems to be some disagreement even among his closest advisors about whether or not this was the way to go. And apparently he went Tom's way.
Well, you're right. And Pam Bondi, the new attorney general in waiting, said the same thing. She's pro law enforcement. The idea was if you slugged a police officer and hurt one or, ran with an American flag like, Sir Lancelot tried to run one through, you wouldn't necessarily qualify for clemency or a pardon, and certainly not, for what Trump said it was an injustice. But I think Tom makes an important point here. Joe Biden in the 11th hour pardoned 2,500 drug dealers. And he said that, they were nonviolent. Well, they don't really know that all of them were nonviolent. They didn't go through those, apparently didn't go through those case by case either. They paid attention to the charge. And if the charge wasn't, murder or mayhem or shooting, if it wasn't assault, if it was just drugs. But those cases sometimes are violent, and they do sometimes involve their lesser charges. And even to the point, even if it was true, is it worse? Is it more heinous to deal fentanyl to a teenager than it is to slug a police? I had a nephew and my godson died from an overdose of heroin, and the dealer was never brought to justice. So I think when the way Biden behaved has made it difficult for Democrats to criticize this. And in terms of us just talking about the merits, Julie Kelly, who writes for Real Clear Investigations, did some important work in this, and the Justice Department sort of weaponized itself against these people. They used an Enron statute that was aimed at shredding documents to enhance to double their prison times of some of these people who were not violent. The judges in the case clearly had animus for Trump. They said so basically from the bench, and they were sentencing these people up until last week. So I think turning the page on this may actually be a good thing for the country, not just for these defendants, and even for the Democrats. I think that if there's a consensus that the Justice Department and that the criminal justice system shouldn't be weaponized, and both parties agree to that. Going forward, that's a positive development in my view.
So, but Tom, what do you make of this sort of pardon culture that we've entered in the last couple months, where both sides seeming to be escalating sort of this, playing this pardon card? It seems very antithetical to the American system of justice. If the president can, with a stroke of a pen, wipe out an entire set of crimes without going through a careful review of each one, which I would think
you
would
called
be,
on Tom first, so I'll let him answer. But I want to crack at that question.
Okay,
go ahead,
Tom.
Carl.
Okay.
Well, it's a power given to the president, only to the president, not to the attorney general, not to the vice president, and not to Congress. It was deliberately done by the founders because mercy was the one trait that kings of England could exhibit that they wanted to keep in the chief executive. I actually think it's a positive thing. It has been a moribund thing in the last 40 years. Richard Nixon pardoned most people, on Christmas Day than his successors did in their whole, 4 or 8 years. It's not a bad thing. I know what you're talking about, Andy. If it's just another partisan arrow in the arsenal, that's not what anybody ever intended. But this idea that a chief executive can grant mercy to individual people, Richard Nixon, Hunter Biden, Ford and Joe Biden, respectively, or an entire class of people, Vietnam War, draft evaders, Confederate soldiers, in this case, the mob that stormed the Capitol. That's very much part of the American system. And if anything, in my view, it's been underused.
Wow. Even though if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see Carl and I are dressed like twins today, even though we disagree on this. But
that's how cold it is outside. We're wearing sweaters indoors.
Maybe Carl will agree with me on this. I think Biden has really warped the pardon power with these blanket sort of pardons going back to 2014, preemptive pardons for, Mark Milley and Anthony Fauci. Why do these people need pardons? And why do they need it going back 10 full years? And pardoning your family, that's not for any and all crimes going back 10 years. I mean, that is not what the pardon power was supposed to be used for in the founders' original vision, I don't think. And Carl, I hope you'd agree with me on this one.
I agree with you that's a warped use of it. But I guess I'm talking writ large. I agree with you, Tom, completely. But the idea, let's take the weaponization of the criminal justice system off the table. If that's the bigger message here, that's going to help both political parties and it's going to help the country, despite this abuse that you talk about, Tom.
Okay, but here's the other part of this argument is that this he pardoned the leader of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, and
the guy wasn't even in Washington on January 6th.
Let me finish. He was the head of the Oath Keepers. They were 18 and 22 years, I think, respectively, were their pardons. Tom or Carl, are you not worried at all that this sends a message to people saying, look, if you do something and it's something that Trump agrees with, even if it's violent, you are, and even if you're convicted by a jury of your peers,
the president
don't worry about it
me
because Trump's going to pardon you.
Well, yeah, okay. Look, Andy, if what they've been through, if that's the lesson they derived from this ordeal, they're too stupid to be helped by anything we say on this show.
Tom, do you see any downside to this at all?
Sure. I mean, I don't know that I mean, if you think this is bad, wait till Trump pardons his family on the way out the door 4 years from now and watch how the media reacts. I mean, look, this to me,
you guys are ganging up on me, I fear.
I'm ganging up on Joe Biden because I thought it was just, he left office in such a low manner. And this idea that, first he said he wasn't going to pardon Hunter, then he did. And you have all these folks, Democrats, and we've seen the videos. If you're online, you've seen the videos of Adam Schiff and, oh my gosh, Andrew Weissman, or, all these folks saying preemptive pardons are a terrible idea. Well, they were saying this in 2020 because they thought Trump was going to do it on his way out the door. And lo and behold, 4 years later, it's actually Biden is the one who does it. And so I think he just completely All of these folks you talk about, all the norms, the democratic norms, and we're saving democracy and all that. You just take a seat. I mean, it's just so hypocritical, and there doesn't seem to be, as far as I can tell, a huge backlash or outrage from folks on the left or even folks in the media. I mean, I was looking at the New York Times headline about this story. It was the most anodyne, blasé thing you've ever seen written. And obviously it wouldn't be that way if it was about Trump or basically any Republican for that matter.
See what Tom did there, Andy? He turned this question into press criticism.
I can't help it. I can't.
It's like magic. It's like you do.
I'm a one-trick pony for sure.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to have to take a little break here. When we come back, I want to talk about Carl's latest column, which is pretty interesting. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
This is Real Clear Politics on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics
on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And Carl, you have a new column that's just debuted on RCP. It's called Cannon Fodder. There's this new picture of you with this snappy fedora on. I commend it to everyone. It's going to come out Tuesday and Thursday afternoons.
Tuesday and Friday. Tuesday and Friday.
Tuesday and Friday. I'm sorry. So everyone should check it out. It's on RealClearPolitics.com. And you write today about Elon Musk and his hand gestures, call it that, on Monday. What do you make of the media firestorm over what he did?
Well, I hope our listeners and viewers can just disregard what I said in the previous segment about Tom bashing the media, because
here it comes.
I kind of did a little of that myself today. Yeah, so Elon Musk comes out. He bounds up on the stage. He's like a teenager at a rave, and he's shouting, and he's so awkward, and he says, all elections matter, I know, but this one really mattered, and thank you for making it happen. And he hits his chest and like his heart going out to the people there. And it was just a, spontaneous thing. And he did it twice. And I would never have predicted this, but within minutes, PBS is saying, Elon Musk gave what appeared to be a fascist salute. I mean, he was like touching his heart and going, the fascists didn't have a lot of heart, let's just say. And this thing caught on, and all the usual suspects, all the media outlets played it. The next day, Senator Murphy, Tom, is berating the new UN ambassador nominee about it, saying, yeah, right wingers, Hitler salute, AOC attacks the Anti-Defamation League, which is a little more attuned to anti-Semitism than most organizations or people, said, look, this was an awkward gesture. It was not a Nazi salute. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez attacks the ADL. So she's now this woman who, by the way, doesn't support Israel, wouldn't condemn Hamas. Now she's more attuned to anti-Semitism than the ADL. It's like crazy time. And I wrote a nuanced column appealing to the better angels of my brothers and sisters in the press. I can say brothers and sisters now because Emperor Trump has by fiat said there are only two genders. So I guess I'm on safe ground there. And ADL says, let's have a little grace here. And I'm trying to encourage those good impulses. It might be like a drop in the bucket, but I tried.
Tom, I'll tell you what Elon said. He said, frankly, they need better dirty tricks. This everyone is Hitler attack is so tired. What do you make?
It is so tired. I mean, it's ridiculous. I think Carl said, and I don't think you were being facetious when you said, I would not have predicted this or could not have predicted this, which is kind of cute, Carl. I mean, it's very sweet of you, but my God, I mean, everybody could have predicted this, right? You take this gesture. He's got his hand over his heart with his fingers spread. He says, "From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you." And you strip it of all context, right? And then just say, "Oh, he put his arm out, so therefore it's a Nazi salute." I mean, it's preposterous. And the good news is that I think it is so tired that the usual suspects are doing their thing, right? NPR and Josh Marshall and Senator Murphy and the New York Times, whatever, and the rest of the sort of sane, rational public are just like, sit down. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Well, Tom, they ran on this and they lost. Are they uneducable?
Well, Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I think it shows that like it's the same old playbook. It's the same. You remember the thing with the OK sign, and people used to put up the OK sign, and suddenly that was like some secret white nationalist symbol. And
people lost their jobs.
I mean, preposterous, right? And this is another example of that. And it's just like, I think people have had enough of that. It is trying to, gin up hatred and division. As Carl mentioned, it's quite rich coming from the folks who really couldn't bring themselves to condemn Hamas and some of these protests that were going on. Suddenly, these are the staunch defenders of
Jews.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is preposterous. And the good news is I think most people see it that way. The bad news is I think it's going to continue. I think we will continue. The press will continue to do this. The Democrats will continue to do this at every possible opportunity. And because it's all they know how to do, I think.
Yeah. Well, it is. The other irony, of course, is that the families of the Jewish hostages were in the room.
Shortly thereafter, brought up on stage.
It's brought on stage. So it's a little crazy. But I do want to talk to Joe, though, Carl, just broadly about what happened on Monday in terms of Trump's energy and his, Energizer Bunny kind of day. He gave 3 speeches. He attended 3 inaugural balls, and he gave a 90-minute press conference.
I think he spoke at all the inaugural balls too. I think he spoke 6 times, all after 12 noon. And then had a 90-minute press conference on the Resolute desk. I don't think, it was, well, you know what it reminds you of? So we had this, and maybe this is part of the reason for it. So we've now, in 4 years, inaugurated our second 78-year-old man as president.
Right.
What this reminds you is that the aging process is capricious and that not all 78-year-olds are equal. This guy's energy is undeniable. I still have my doubts about the longevity of a man who doesn't believe in exercise, who actually believes exercise hurts you and loves red meat. I don't mean red meat rhetoric. I mean red meat. So, I hope JD Vance is in good shape. However, he Energizer Bunny. That's right. He was full of vim yesterday and vigor. And I don't want to take back anything I said yesterday about his speech, because if I were a speechwriter, I wouldn't have kept, the only word I would have kept in there is like, good morning. But this idea that he gave this, rambling campaign speech for an inaugural address, it wasn't really the way I even understand what an inaugural address is. I'm not going to take that back. It should have been better rhetoric. But given what happened in the next few hours, all these orders, these executive orders, the policies pulling out of the climate change, he said at one of his many speeches that Joe Biden was one of the worst presidents, and he can, let's not beat around the bush. He's the worst president that ever lived. That was of a piece. His rhetoric was at a piece with what he was doing, which was basically trying to erase the Biden legacy. And it would have been hypocritical, I think, to have too much kumbaya in the speech.
Right.
So maybe the speech wasn't as bad as I said it was.
Oh, interesting, because Tom, you weren't here yesterday. We missed you, but Carl and I disagreed about the speech. Carl thought it was the worst speech. I thought it was grading on a curve, a pretty good speech and pretty disciplined. And you remember, Tom, we were talking last week about, we were wondering whether he would go off script and give one of his Castro-length speeches. He saved that for the second speech, I guess. But since you're here, break the tie. What did you make of the speech?
I mean, the parts I haven't watched the thing in its entirety, but I've seen clips of it. And it seemed fine to me. I mean, it seemed like exactly what you would expect. So I guess I'd side more with you than with Carl. I didn't think it was a travesty or some abomination or whatever. I thought it was perfectly fine. Again, grading on a curve. I like that idea, Andy, because you're not going to compare this to, JFK or Abraham Lincoln or anybody like that.
Or even Eisenhower.
It's
Carl
Donald Trump.
compared it to Reagan and found it wanting. So
yeah, of course. I mean, you could compare just about anybody to Reagan and find it wanting. So I don't think that's a fair comparison. But for Donald Trump, it was perfectly fine. And I think the point about the, call it what you want, the Big Bang, Donald Trump coming out, he obviously was very aggressive immediately after election in terms of lining up people and making nominations and all that stuff. And then here you have on this first day, which a lot of people were anticipating, he comes out and it's an overwhelming. You couldn't even keep up with the news flow of the executive order after executive order. I mean, it was overwhelming.
Steve Bannon called it Days of Thunder.
Yeah, and look, I think that is in contrast to the executive that we've seen in that office over the last few months, if not years.
It's also contrast to Trump the first time he was there. He now knows how to use the levers of power. It's a different approach.
Well, and look, it's a completely different. When he came in last time, I mean, he was fighting, the Democrats. He was fighting the resistance media. He was fighting a big faction with his own party who were out to get him and tried to throw up roadblocks. It's not like that anymore. I mean, he's got the Republican Party's almost 100% unified behind him and his agenda. There are no protests. There is no resistance. The media is.
There was a protest march.
The media is like.
There was a protest march on Sunday. It attracted
really? Well,
a few thousand people. The women, they called it the People's March.
Okay, it
was
okay. So orders of magnitude less than it was last time.
That's
right.
You
get the point.
Yes.
And on top of that, to Carl's point, so he's facing much less resistance from within his party, from within the media. Even the Democrats are, kind of don't really know how to get their arms wrapped around him this time. And he is much more knowledgeable and well-informed about how to work the levers of government. And so you put all those things together, and it did feel just like this barrage. And we'll see how long it keeps going. But he's off to a very aggressive start.
Okay. Well, look, we're going to take a quick break. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. When we come back, I do want to talk more about what he actually did yesterday, in addition to what he said. And you're right. It's a barrage of executive orders. So we're going to talk about that. Don't go away. We'll be back after this.
This is Real Clear Politics on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics with Andrew Walworth. You're listening to Sirius XM's POTUS, Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl Cannon and Tom Bevan. And Carl, the White House website today lists 46 presidential actions that were taken on January 20th. He revoked 78 executive orders issued by the Biden administration. And I'm not going to even begin to list everything he did, but he did issue an order titled Restoring Freedom of Speech and Ending Federal Censorship, aimed at reversing Biden administration's rules on engagement on social media censorship. Terminated all remote work arrangements for federal employees in the executive branch. He delayed the TikTok ban. Anyway, lots of stuff. What did you make of it? And what do you think is the most important or consequential thing you did?
Well, the other two that I think the censorship thing was important. You have, and it was going to take an executive order because what you had was all these agencies had money hidden in their budget to under the guise of misinformation, screw with Americans' right to free expression, including, Real Clear Politics, and, going after the press, doing all these things. And there was no way to know all of it that was going on. But this executive order makes that's not administration policy now. The people doing it now are going to have to answer for it. That was the one I was most interested in. The most consequential may have been declaring the border, a crisis area, and guys immediately closing it off to these people who've been misusing, with the Biden administration's permission, the refugee aspect of our immigration law, basically just using it as an excuse to let anybody in who was able to make it to the border. That's done now. You know what? One thing interests me, Andy. You mentioned he pulled out of the Paris climate thing. He'd done that before. When he did that before, 8 years ago, it was considered very nearly the end of the world in the mainstream media that Tom likes to bash. they lost their minds over it. The European leaders were apoplectic and said some things that didn't even make sense. Said this is the end of the planet. Will you call Trump and talk to him about it? No, I won't. So you thought, wait a minute, if it's the end of the planet, you'd make one more phone call, wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. But they didn't. Anyway, this thing barely got mentioned yesterday. So this idea that China and to a lesser degree India can build as many coal-powered electric power plants as they want, and the United States can't, that we have to send money all over the world. This thing was considered kind of a scam in Trump world. That belief that it was a scam in Trump world was derided by the entire establishment 8 years ago. Now it barely merits a comment. So I thought that was indicative of how Donald Trump has changed the atmosphere, the political atmosphere.
Well, the other thing he's done, of course, is flooded the zone. And there's so many things going on. It was hard for even
to get indignant over any one of them.
Yeah, exactly. Tom, what did you make of it, and what do you think was the most consequential?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there was a lot, and I think probably Carl's right. The most important thing was the border, because that's one of the top concerns. He's got to deal with the economy, but that's going to be a little bit different. There are no executive orders that he can take on the economy, really. I mean, he did announce an energy, emergency, I think is what he called it. But the stuff on the border, like just stopping everything, and then also talking about, birthright citizenship.
Yes, exactly. Ending birthright citizenship was important, I think.
That would be huge.
Well, that's not something you can actually do with a stroke of the pen.
Right.
No.
We'll soon find out.
Right. But so that was, I thought that was probably the most consequential. But, you could see the threads through these, pulling out of these different things, hiring freeze, stop on foreign aid, closing the border. I mean, there was a real sense of we just need to, everything that we're currently doing, stop doing it. And let's just have 45 days or 60 days or 90 days and evaluate and regroup and sort of try and move in a different direction. And all of which I think is, when you take as a whole, a lot of these moves were really, really important, and ones that I think people have been, at least Republicans have been talking about and waiting for at least the last 4 years, if not longer. And so I thought, going back to your original question, Andy, I think the border stuff is probably the most consequential, the most important, certainly from a domestic political standpoint.
Yeah. Well, this birthright citizenship thing is interesting, Carl, because you're right. He can't, or a lot of people, I'll put it that way, say there's this thing called the U.S. Constitution, and that you can't violate that with a stroke of a pen. But what do you think is going to happen with that?
Well, it's in the 14th Amendment. There's the language is a little bit ambiguous. I'm not going to get into the arcane legal arguments, but the Supreme Court has upheld the status quo, i.e. that if you're born here, you're an American. And not just that, John McCain, I think, was born in Panama, but it was a territory then. Been kind of a, nobody said he couldn't run for president. Well, I'm sure Trump probably said it, but but this idea that you have to be born in the United States to parents who are legally here already. That's what Trump is saying. That's not what the law is now. It's not what the overwhelming percentage of legal scholars understand Trump to be mistaken about this. But what Trump has started, he started a debate. And now the people who are arguing this are not just able to say, well, it's the law. They're going to have to say why, not just why they think it's in the Constitution, why they read the 14th Amendment that way. And by the way, I'm not with Trump on this. I'm against him on this. But I think it's worthwhile to point out he has started a conversation here. And the people who favor the status quo are going to have to make their arguments. And they're going to have to say why they think if you came over here illegally and then had a baby, that person is an American. Now, again, that I'm happy with things the way they are, but I also think it's healthy what Trump did is to start this debate. And so we can talk about the entire immigration, the entire system of immigration, because legal immigration should be part of this conversation. The refugees should be part of the conversation. The dreamers should be part of the conversation. The 1 million to 1.5 million people we take every year, every single year, and have for 40 years, almost all of them from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. That should be part of the conversation. And we should come up with a policy that Republicans and Democrats agree is the law of the land and everybody can get behind. And I think in his inimitable way, Trump has helped now start what we need, which is a mature conversation and negotiation.
I would just add, I think what Trump has done with these orders across the board is really sort of, shift the Overton window on where all these, when you talk about, the gender stuff, right? We're going back to two genders. We're going, all of these things. He's really moved the window, and I think that's in reaction to where it had been going, moving further and further left over time, and so this is a course correction, if you will, and we'll see. I mean, he's going to get support from Democrats on some of these issues. We saw the Lake and Riley Act pass the Senate with, I think, 12 Democrats supporting, 35 against, something like that. If he continues to put forward legislation that is, common sense and centrist, Democrats will have to go along with it, because if they don't, they're going to end up, they'll stay in the political wilderness.
Well, yeah. but Tom, they don't have to go along with it. But there has to be part of a conversation. And Andy mentioned censorship earlier. Before, the conversation was just shut down. Trump says there's just two genders. Well, that's not for him to say. There are millions of Americans who consider themselves non-binary or trans, maybe hundreds of thousands, a lot of people. And Trump can't make them go away. But what he can do is start a conversation where the body politic says, okay, yes, we have to treat transgender people with respect and non-binary people with respect. But, biological males maybe shouldn't play sports against girls. Let's talk about it instead of just shutting down the conversation. So again, I think that's his contribution to this, is that nothing's off the table, and we ought to be able to talk about this without being silenced.
Well, I got about a minute left here, Tom, and I just TikTok, of course, is a big big topic. One thing that Trump said, he said, if he saves this deal, and this was so typical of Trump, he said, the TikTok's worth zero unless he saves it. If he saves it, it's worth $1 billion or something. And half of that money, he said, should go to the U.S. Taxpayer. Kind of an interesting take on it. But do you think he's going to be able to save that TikTok deal? And will people be on TikTok 6 months from today?
I suspect they will. By the way, that's another example of an executive order that really he has no business writing. I mean, this was a law passed by Congress that mandated the sale. You can't just, with an executive order, say, "Oh, we're not following the law." I mean, he had a little bit of leeway for review, but he just kind of wrote 75 days. I'm just giving TikTok a lifeline for 75 days. So I question whether that order is even constitutional or not. But I suspect, I was with my 17-year-old son over the weekend. We were out in Los Angeles. He was playing a volleyball tournament, and we were in the hotel room. And when and I said, look, I don't think TikTok's going to shut down. I mean, this just seems unlikely. Something's going to happen. And like an hour later, he's like, I can't get on TikTok. It's shut down. I'm like, so much for my prognosticating powers. And then it came back. So maybe I was half right. I still don't think that they're going to allow this, not allow, but when you've built something that is as big and powerful as TikTok, it has a sort of inertia. There's a desire to keep it by its users and by the people who are making money off of it and all of that, to keep it functioning. And so I suspect they'll work something out. Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. Tom gets the last word, but that's good because we've missed him and he's back.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that.
I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. This is Real Clear Politics. Don't go away. We'll be back after this.
Online at RealClearPolitics.com.
On air on SiriusXM Channel 124.
Real Clear Politics is on POTUS. Not bound by any left-right constructs.
Real Clear Politics. Open to a wide political spectrum.
This is POTUS on SiriusXM Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by Ricard Porter. He's a former RNC committeeman from Illinois and a contributor to Real Clear Politics. Ricard, good to have you back.
Great to be back, Tom.
Okay, so, you're now back in Chicago, but you were in Washington yesterday and attended the some of the inaugural festivities. And, Ricard, you were also there in 2017.
Yep.
And I don't know if we've talked about this on the show or not before, but I remember talking to you after 2017, and you were involved in some of those protests in the streets that got kind of ugly. So first of
I
all,
wrote
give
a
our
piece.
listeners a little bit of background on that,
Yeah.
and then tell us how things felt different, or if they felt different this time around.
In fact, I think I wrote a piece for Real Clear about that. There were riots going on. People don't recall that in 1617, the extent to which the Democrats simply refused to accept the results of the election. For all of their concern about election denying, people have a convenient memory lapse when it comes to what they did between the election in November of 2016 through until the inauguration day, including the so-called Hamilton electors that were supposed to vote at the at the electoral college against Trump and so forth. But it all culminated in a big protest the day before the inauguration. Remember the pink hat crowd? And then Antifa, those thugs, were running around, masked thugs were running around Washington on the 20th and the night of the 20th. After the inauguration, we saw cars burning in downtown Washington. And then when we went back, after the parade to change to go to the ball, we were in a bus with a whole bunch of people, from all over the country, Kentucky and all sorts of places. This was not, going to a ball was not something these folks did on a regular basis. And these bullies stopped the buses from proceeding to the inaugural festivities. And as a result of that, people had to get out of the bus, many of them not really warmly dressed and in their high heels, and had to walk a mile. And the first, several hundred yards of that was through a crowd of thugs that were hurling epithets and, acting in a menacing manner. None of that was going on this time. That's the good news. The bad news is that the government creep, you can see, in the security apparatus, exactly the problem with the government, which is it has this sort of unsolvable problem of keeping someone safe. It is always going to be, open things. And instead, what they do is they create more and more complexity and more people. So they shut the whole city down for all practical purposes, the whole center part of the city. And they wouldn't even let the buses go to the inauguration, the inauguration festivities. I mean, it took me 3 hours to go essentially 12 blocks.
Oh my gosh.
Because you couldn't walk there. You were supposed to arrive on a bus, but then the Secret Service wouldn't let the buses move until the president moved. I mean, it was nuts. And again, the Secret Service is still being run by whoever Biden had in there, right? I mean, so it is what it is, but it was just a sign of chaos. And, my first thought was, let's bring Doge to the Secret Service,
Where's Elon? What's he doing?
And all those guys, because they have such a bureaucratic, unpractical approach to security. It's like, let's keep them secure by making sure none of the people that finance the whole thing get to actually go to the parties that they paid for. It's crazy.
Well, Elon's busy giving Hitler salutes, apparently.
That is so ridiculous.
We talked about that in the earlier part of the show, but you were there, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was watching this. I was filming it. I think I may have posted something. I didn't see anything like that. And, someone said, well, it was this clip and it was apparently this little moment. But, to say it is a salute in favor of something, you have to have some sign of intent that that's what someone meant.
Right.
Right. I mean, you have to have, a Hitler salute. I mean, if I go like this, and that's like my heart, and I want to wave to you, that doesn't mean it's Hitler. It could be like, hey, I feel you guys. Thank you. And the truth is, let's face it, Elon is not exactly out of the New York City Ballet, right? I mean, the guy is kind of awkward, right? So the idea that somehow we have a salute, I mean, it's literally, this is what people don't like about the mainstream media. I mean, they're making something up and they're ascribing some intent in the complete absence of anything, just to throw a slur out there.
Yeah.
And I think it's terrible. And one of my friends, posted on this, and I went back and forth with him. I was saying, it's just not right. He's saying, well, he's supporting the AFD. Well, the AFD are not Nazis either. And so the whole idea, just because they're coming at this as being a, German first party, essentially, where, what's happened in the West is this kind of the left-wing culture was open borders. And it wasn't just the United States. It was all over, Europe. And then the left-wing media ascribes anyone who says, wait, this unchecked immigration from people and from cultures that have nothing to do with the existing culture of these countries, that somehow that is, nativism akin to Nazism. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
There's no sign of anti-Semitism. I mean, the whole thing is like literally nuts, and it shows in a nutshell the problem with the mindset of people in the mainstream media, where they think they can throw a slur at someone, with just some kind of weird association because of somehow they moved their body when there's no intent behind it to make that connection. I mean, it's one thing to say he had a Nazi t-shirt on, or he said something like, Heil, or, there was nothing else other than the fact that he's pounding his heart and then he waves,
Yeah.
And I hope that.
Well, listen, I've already said my piece on this earlier in the show, so I won't bore our listeners and viewers with any more. But so talk about the inauguration itself. You were there in the center. You saw, Trump signing these. I mean, it's just a raft of executive orders. What was the atmosphere like in there? And how was it looked like the crowd had been waiting for this for a long time.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, promises made, promises delivered. I mean, that is who that guy is. And so he said, I'm going to do these things on day one. And he signed, what was the total number, Tom? It was like over 200. It was a crazy number of executive orders. I don't even know. And that they were that prepared to do that. They at least prepared the executive orders better than they did bus routes. Okay. I guess that was more important. But look, what it shows is that there is a true cultural shift. The people have affirmed their control over the government through the person of Donald Trump. And they've rejected anti-American ideas like DEI. And so I think, right out of the box, no nonsense. It's sort of like the age of BS is over. And he just sort of went after issue after issue after issue. And, like, for example, revoking the security clearance on those people that lied intentionally, trying to mislead people about the likely background on that laptop. I mean, again, it was just sort of like, we're not taking this nonsense. You don't get a pass just because you're lefty. It was so refreshing, I think, to so many people to see the government stand up, speak firmly and with a strong voice, and stand up for America. And I think that's what we saw yesterday, for America and American values.
What did you make of the pardons of all the January 6th folks? Again, that's something we talked about earlier in the show, but I'm interested to get your take on that.
Well, I think the January 6th events, I don't think there was ever an excuse for people to be storming the Capitol, okay, period. But the enforcement of the law has to be neutral and even. And that occurred after a lot of riots associated with the George Floyd situation, where nobody was prosecuted for anything. I mean, they burned down a federal building in Oregon. As far as I know, nobody went to jail for that. We had all sorts of protests that tore up the center part of Chicago, the Loop. The Loop is still not recovered. And nobody was prosecuted for that either, as far as I can see. So to have this differential treatment under the law for law breaking is, I think, what that's ultimately about. It isn't saying it's okay to go storm the Capitol, because it isn't. But what it does say is that, and I think, and I haven't seen all the details of it, Tom, but my impression is he did make some differentiation in terms of the nature of what people did, that not everybody got treated the same. Some people who did some things that were more criminal were treated less favorably in this wave of pardons and commutations. So I think that's appropriate, actually. I think that justice ought to be tailored to the individual circumstances, and it shouldn't be, politically weighted one way or the other.
And what last thing, and again, this is a question that we discussed amongst ourselves earlier, what did you think was the most important, most consequential thing that he did yesterday?
I just think the strength and the tone that he communicated that was unambiguous. I think about Teddy Roosevelt talking about talking softly and carrying a big stick. He has revised that. He says, we got a big stick, and I'm not going to talk softly about it. I'm not going to wave our power. Instead, I'm going to use our power for the benefit of America, not to the detriment of other countries, but to make sure that the playing field is ultimately going to be even, and that we don't we're not the giant that is always giving, that it's got to be a two-way street. I mean, the age of the Marshall Plan is now officially dead, right? And I think that's sort of the message, which is America is self-assertive, it's strong, and in terms of its policies domestically, it's very pro-American. We're not going to be criticizing America and American history. Instead, we're going to be celebrating it. We're going to take hold of the government. We're going to shave it down, remove these elements within the government that want to shape us, and at the same time communicate to the rest of the world that we're just not going to be pushed around. We're going to be a nation of consequence. And when we speak, it's going to be with meaning. And I think that people will take it seriously. I think you're already seeing the fact the hostages were released the day before his inauguration wasn't by accident. So, I think it's just my sense of it is America is back, baby. It's back. And that's just the overall tone. So that's what I liked about it.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it there. Richard Porter, former RNC committeeman from Illinois and contributor to Real Clear Politics. Richard, always good to have you. Thanks.
Tom, have a great day.
All right. That's going to do it for us. On behalf of Carl and Andy, I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Everybody have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
The
Politics
of
the
United States.
This is POTUS on SiriusXM Channel 124.